Welcome back to Chasing Masculinity, the podcast where we explore how we as men can live a life embracing masculinity. I'm your host, Colton Wutzke, and today we're diving into a topic that is foundational to our growth as men: physical health and responsibility, and how to view this through a biblical lens. As men, we are called to be stewards of our bodies, not just for ourselves, but for those who depend on us. Strength, discipline, and resilience start with how we treat the bodies God has given us. But how do we approach fitness, health, and well-being through a biblical lens? How do we ensure that our pursuit of physical strength aligns with our greater purpose as men of faith? To help unpack this, I'm joined by Matthew Navarro, a good friend and someone I've had countless discussions with on this very subject. Matthew brings a unique and blended background in physical health and ministry, and I couldn't be more excited for today's conversation. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Colton. It's such a privilege to join you on Chasing Masculinity and discuss this topic that I'm so passionate about. Let me just share a little background on me. I am a 27-year-old father of 2 children, and I am happily married to my wife of 6 years. Being a father and husband has really challenged my responsibility of taking good care of my physical body through exercise and nutrition. I went to college and graduated with an undergrad in human nutrition and dietetics, and was working in a hospital helping patients take care of their bodies through diet and nutrition plans. When I was in college, I was really active, taking great care of my physical body, playing basketball or lifting weights almost every day. In addition to that, I was also really disciplined in the kitchen. When I became a father, I fell into the common trap of putting my workouts and nutrition on hold in order to care for my wife and the child we were raising. I gained close to 25 pounds of unhealthy weight and soon found myself realizing that I had come up short on my responsibility to remain healthy and care for my body. God gives so much grace, and now after having my second child, I am on this journey to be disciplined and fight for my physical health in order to be a better husband and a better father. Currently, I work in a missions organization caring for missionary families, and I carry this passion of nutrition and physical health with me as I care for them. And I also truly believe that obeying God's command to care for our bodies physically bears fruit mentally and spiritually.
So I think the first thing I want to talk about is the biblical stewardship of the body, kind of like what you were talking about, and kind of like what we had come into this conversation with the intent of discussing. To start us off, I found some scripture that I think you'll find familiar, and that's 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. So I know this verse is kind of on sexual immorality, talking about the body as a temple, which is kind of applied to a greater context today and is pretty commonly used. Can this be applied to a greater context of just taking care of your body?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think in the New Testament, you often see Jesus describe us, his children, but also use the metaphor of us as his slaves. So you see that when Jesus paid the ultimate price for our sins, he actually bought us with a price, right? He bought us with an extreme price. And so now we are his property. We are his children. We are his people. And so when Jesus paid the price, he bought us. And God doesn't want his property to be trashed or damaged. So he calls us to care for ourselves, knowing that we are his valued possession. I think one example would be I wouldn't trash an expensive car that I paid a lot of money for and worked really hard for and made an ultimate sacrifice for. And I also wouldn't let someone else trash my expensive car that I sacrificed and spent so much for. And so when we learn how much Christ values us and that we are his properties, then we can understand the commandment and call to be good stewards of our bodies.
So when you mentioned not trashing, I was immediately brought back to Jesus at the temple and how he kicked out all of the peddlers and the people trying to sell goods and basically make the temple for profit, which was not its intended purpose, as it was God's place. Kind of trashing what was God's place, what was given to his people, and how Jesus expelled that sort of behavior, the trashing of God's gift, and how that can be related to the human body too. As we are children of God, as he created us, as we're created in his image, we are trashing what is essentially his by the neglect of physical health.
Yeah, I think something that I've learned is just how important our physical bodies are. First of all, Christ promises us in eternal life that we will have new physical bodies, right? These new bodies. And then we also constantly run into this thing with our physical bodies where we have this earthly body that's sinful and that is slowly deteriorating and falling apart. But then we also have Christ, who has created us in this image that is so special and actually ask us to take care of our physical bodies, even though they are going to deteriorate and die. But I think he usually uses this as a form of a metaphor and also as a way to teach us discipline.
I agree. I think that kind of ties into the idea of stewardship versus ownership, right?
Yep.
Where God has entrusted us with our bodies, and it's our duty to maintain them, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that word of stewardship. When I think of stewardship, I think of this definition of taking responsibility for a resource and prioritizing how this resource can create profit or goodness. I think it's the same thing. God has given us this responsibility of caring for a physical body and prioritizing the goodness and the good things that he has given us through our bodies. Whether that's just being physically healthy and playing with your children, or being able to play sports, which bring a lot of joy to our lives. It could be something as being able to go for a walk with your spouse and have a good conversation. All these things are just good things that God has given us, and he wants us to maximize and experience his goodness through our physical bodies.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I feel like that is our responsibility to others, especially as men, to have a strong, healthy body that enables us as a man to serve his family, to serve the community, to serve your mission in life, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to be physically capable. I mean, to bring it back to your expensive car analogy, right? If you trash an expensive car, at a certain point, it's not going to function to the level that it was designed for.
Yeah.
At a certain point, it won't drive, or it won't drive as well. And that just comes down to that regular maintenance and service, to just make sure that you're keeping yourself clean and keeping yourself in check, so that your purpose as a man, your duty as a man, is not diminished.
Yeah, we'll get into kind of this conversation a little later on, as I had it out there. But our bodies are constantly, I think, being attacked. And if we care for our bodies well, if we care for our physical bodies well, then all the physical benefits that Christ has given us using our bodies are maximized, right? So that stewardship aspect, that we're investing really well, and that goodness is coming from it. But if you don't invest in it, for example, with the car, again, if you don't go get your oil changes, do your due diligence, then the goodness is just really minimized. And so I think that's the call to discipline that Christ has given us as men, is to maximize what he's given us.
I have this concept that I've worked on, and it is related to my 24 rules of masculinity. It's rule number 7: sacrifice leads to a prosperous future. And essentially, in this context, caring for your body now is an investment in your long-term ability to lead as a man. So it's short-term pain for a long-term gain. And it's similar to a financial sacrifice, where you're sacrificing now that's going to lead you to financial security later, or sacrificing comfort for discipline and fitness. It's going to lead to that long-term strength and resilience that allows you to function throughout life. And I think choosing to work out when you don't feel like it, or eating clean when it's really easy to just go get ice cream, or to just get takeout, or whatever that looks like, indulging yourself is that investment in the future self. But I also want to talk about the extremes of going too far, because I feel like that's also fairly common, especially with just modern fitness influencers. And we're kind of being bombarded by this idea of what physical health should be. And we're getting this very narrow image of what these people are doing. And it seems like they are going to the extremes. I mean, it is the sauna, the ice baths, working out 3 hours a day, eating nothing but rice and beef, and doing all this. We're not seeing the other side of things. So I do want to talk about some of the extremes that we can get into when we are making this long-term investment into our health for our future, because while some men completely neglect their health entirely, others will completely idolize it, and it will take over their life. So I want to talk about the balance of how we can maintain to keep our fitness, but keep it in its proper place in our faith-driven life. So what are your thoughts on avoiding the idolatry of fitness?
Yeah, it's so important. I think with everything that God has given us, everything's a heart issue, right? And so even with fitness, it's a heart issue. So if you're falling into the idolatry of, oh man, I want Brad Pitt's body from Fight Club.
That is the common trope from all of the 2000s. Everyone wanted to look like him.
Right, that skinny, jacked aesthetic. It can be really easy to chase after a physical image, chase after even just, I think, this feeling of power and strength, where I think when you look at what the Bible tells us about caring for our bodies, it's not necessarily to have this Greek god body, but rather it's for your body just to be healthy and for you to feel good and to have energy throughout the day. And so falling into the idolatry of chasing after either this physical image or this physical feeling can get really dangerous. I think it's just as bad as actually neglecting your body.
So it'd be like recognizing that the body is a tool for God's work, not some sort of trophy for this self-glory.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the meme years ago of that Korean church that had the Jesus up there on the crucifix that was just jacked beyond belief, just like biceps the size of a head? I feel like there is a cross section where health is become an idol in Christianity of in itself, thinking that God's image for us is to be these jacked Greek gods that just are naturally and inherently bigger than any man could probably naturally attain.
Yeah, I think too, as men, right, even recently with the inclusion of social media and almost these movements of whether it's bodybuilding or aesthetic physiques, we as men are constantly influenced by what we see. And so it's so important, I think, to have those role models in your life of fathers, have those role models in your life of godly men who portray that healthy Christian father body, that masculine body.
So the next thing I want to talk about is discipline and self-control in physical health, kind of like what we've been touching on with going to the extremes. I feel like discipline is a foundation of masculinity. Being a disciplined man, I feel like, is a core value. It's certainly talked about in Paul's letter to 1 Timothy about how an elder should serve the church, right? It's somebody who is disciplined. And so I think that is definitely a clear biblical picture of what men who lead the household, men who lead the family should be striving for. It should be what men become, right? And I feel like there's a link between physical, mental, and spiritual discipline. So you could be very disciplined when it comes to reading scripture, when it comes to seeking wisdom from the correct sources, putting yourself in the proper hierarchy in life, placing yourself below God. But if you're not balancing that with mental, physical health and maintaining discipline in all those fields, I feel like there's pillars of your life. And if you're neglecting the rest, you're still going to fall.
I think something interesting is when I was in college getting my undergrad in human nutrition and dietetics, the definition of what health is. So actually in colleges and in textbooks, they'll teach you that the definition of health is this balance between your physical health, your mental health, and your spiritual health, and how they're kind of all independent, but they also all affect one another. If you have the discipline to address your physical health, then you probably also have the discipline to work towards your spiritual and mental health. And then also too, the goodness that comes from taking care of your physical body directly affects your mental state. It directly affects your experience with the Lord spiritually. And so yes, they're all just dependent on one another.
I don't know if it's just a correlation or if there's actual causation between this, but I feel like as I have continually worked on improving my physical health, which I've been working out somewhat consistently for the past 7 years now, but it's waxed and waned, and obviously COVID put a big damper on being able to go to the gym and work out in a healthy manner. Mm-hmm. I say healthy manner because I hate cardio, so I avoided it very frequently. But I feel like as that has progressed, and especially the past few years, I've really seen this growth expound upon itself. Mm-hmm. That is also the time where I have started properly orientating myself in the world, and I've really grown in my journey with my relationship with God, with not just knowledge but also wisdom and where to seek that, my discernment. I feel like there has just been a consistent increase in all of those balances. I'm not somebody who really delves, this, too much into like emotion and my mental health and how I'm always feeling, because I feel like that's kind of over idealized, and now in today's world a little bit is how you're feeling is the pinnacle of who you are. But there's also obviously some very important aspects of mental health there, and as somebody who probably plays into the very stereotypical stoic trope of avoid that, suppress that, just be a man, I feel like that's also improved over the years. So I feel like when you're disciplined in one area, you are going to, and you can translate that to like you were talking about, physical, mental, spiritual, you're gonna see change in all of those areas.
Yeah, I agree. I think, first of all, my personal experience with working on my physical health is I have noticed a vast increase when I care for my physical body. So whether it's eating right, getting sunlight, working out, my mental health completely improves. So I know you probably know this, but especially as a teenager, young adult years, even now, I've always struggled with pretty severe anxiety, and at some points depression. And so I've noticed that when I fall into those spouts of anxiety and depression, the last thing I want to do is get up and go outside or get up and eat some nutritious food, right? And so I found that when I actually push through that window of not wanting to do these things and actually just got out and done it because I know it's good for me, that I get out of those stages really quickly, which is something that's really interesting. And I think you'll see that scientifically. There's something about putting your body under the stress, and then putting your body under stress actually leads to de-stress, and the stress leaving your body, and also brings forth mental clarity. And then the other thing is, as we as men learn to make the daily sacrifice to, whether it's work out or eat healthy, I think we also then can easily learn the daily sacrifice it takes to follow Christ and to open our Bibles every single day. Maybe it's going to prayer every day. Whatever it may be, just practicing that discipline with our physical bodies is such an easy way to train ourselves to practice then the discipline of spiritual health.
That's a very good point. You're right. I mean, you're basically practicing discipline. If you have some sort of physical routine, whatever that is, obviously I am a big proponent of weight training, and that's where I spend, I'd say, the overwhelming majority of my physical health improvement and my time, regardless of if it's cardio, if you're a runner, if whatever it is, if it's yoga, if it's just you're big on walks and maintaining your diet, whatever that discipline is channeled into, you're basically training yourself to be disciplined elsewhere.
Yeah,
because it's much easier to translate once you have arguably one of the hardest things. I mean, look at the epidemic of health we have in America right now, or just in the Western world. Rates of obesity and all of the issues that are correlated to that, like heart disease and even like cancer, which is really weird that there's a correlation between cancer and body fat and obesity and general health risk is just, it just shows how undisciplined we are as a nation, and also how easy it has become to become just lackadaisical in our nature. And there's a direct correlation, I'm thinking, to we as, again, the Western culture, so a lot of European countries, North American countries, places that have historically been very Christian, have just seen massive decreases. Yeah. Something like Poland 50 years ago was like 92% Christian, because Poland was a very Catholic nation for a very long time, and it's dropped significantly. I don't remember the figures, but it's something like, I think under half the population now even identifies with Christianity in just a short window. And that's also the time period that we've seen this massive uptick in obesity, overweight people, just general health conditions on the rise. And I know there's a lot of different factors coming into that, but I can't help but think there has to be some correlation of we've just lost discipline.
Yeah.
And I think as men, that's something that we can lead.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's definitely a correlation. I think one thing that Americans fall into, and especially Christians here in America, being in the country of the free and being able to indulge in processed foods and not being told what you should and shouldn't eat, like you can make your own decisions, is this idea that, I guess some people might argue it's biblical, is that we are but a vapor. Our physical bodies are going to deteriorate and eventually die. So what's the point of really caring for them in this life, right? And so I think that's a very sinful idea, and it often leads to being undisciplined and not caring for your physical bodies. And to be fair, it's absolutely true. We could be taking care of our bodies, be as healthy as we possibly want, and you or I could get into a car crash tomorrow, and that could be the end of our physical bodies.
I love that. Sad. I know we've talked about that before, that idea of just like multiplying by zero. You can go through all this work and dedicate your life to longevity and health, and then forget to wear your seatbelt.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. And even though as Christians, like, we're promised struggles in this life, and whether it's persecution, I think God really wants us to maximize, again, that stewardship idea, maximize his goodness and how we experience his goodness. And one of that is just by taking care of our physical bodies. If we maximize the goodness that can come from a healthy body, I think we also get to experience God's goodness through that. And so for Christians who don't spend time and don't put in the discipline into their physical bodies, I think they're missing out on a character of God, a goodness of God that you can actually experience if you were just disciplined.
So that's a perfect segue into that consistency and routine. And that's a part of the discipline and self-control and physical health, and the importance of daily habits, no matter how small. It's those repeated actions over time that will lead to that long-term success, and developing a sustainable workout routine or healthy eating habits, whatever that is. It just shows how that can compound. And creating that consistency and routine is fundamental to discipline as a whole.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about overcoming laziness. I feel like the real reason most men don't stick to a fitness regimen, it's not time, although that's probably most people's general go-to. It's really just discipline. It's not sticking to it because it's easy to come up with a reason not to.
Yeah, and I think me as a father, I've fallen into this, where slothfulness, laziness. And I think one thing in my life that was like a big shocker was that when you have a child and you become a father, the routine that I had gotten myself into of working out and eating healthy had to completely change. It's almost as if I had to start from zero again and come up with a new game plan. And so in that happening, I actually just decided to give up for a time period. I think it's important to note too that there's different times in your life where you have to change up your routine. Sometimes you have to start over from zero with your game plan. And that can be really hard. Discipline can be really hard. I think right now with having 2 kids and a family, the best time for me to go and get a workout in is probably at 5 a.m. And I don't want to wake up at 5 in the morning, right? Because when I was in college and didn't have children yet, I was able to work out whenever I had a break in school, whatever it may be. But that's just not the same anymore. I either have to get my workout in at home with children hanging all over me, or I have to get my butt up and go to the gym in the morning at 5. I think there's different periods of our lives where we're going to be faced with this reality that we have to change up our game plan. And we still have to be able to push through and be disciplined and find a way to put in effort there.
So what are some practical tips that we can come up with for creating those lifelong fitness habits, specifically creating that sustainable routine over time?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's going to change. And I think that scares a lot of people is once you get into a routine that you've established, it feels really good. I'm definitely somebody who thrives on a routine. And if something throws, just on a daily basis, something throws a wrench into that, it could throw off all of the plans, and you could just say, forget it, this doesn't work. And I see that on a daily basis, where I have a routine broken out per hour of the day. But if you are starting this routine on a weekly, monthly basis, I feel like it's just as easy when something happens to just say, this doesn't work anymore. I've worked so hard. Like you said, you're starting from zero again. You have to throw away the whole thing.
Yeah.
So how can we not throw away the whole thing? I mean, if you don't have a routine, I guess we'll start with that. The step would be to start small, right? Consistency is more important than intensity. I feel like a lot of people do this. It's like the New Year's Eve resolution, right? I'm going to go to the gym. And the first thing on New Year's Day is I'm going to go start working out, and you go to the gym for 3 hours and you just hammer yourself and you eat 1,000 calories a day and all you've had is lettuce.
Yeah.
And then the next day you feel like crap and you don't do it ever again.
Yeah.
So I really want to stress the importance of consistency over just sheer intensity. That's something you really have to work into.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great example of that. We have this habit of overcomplicating game plans, right? And structure and routines. And part of that, I think, is from even having social media as of recently, right? You can go on YouTube and be like, oh, this is the perfect workout for you. And it's going to be this many sets, this many reps. You got to get in these exercises. And so I think the first step is when you're creating a structure or a routine is to actually simplify it. Don't overcomplicate things. Keep it really simple. So for me as a dad, if I gave myself 3 things that I wanted to accomplish within a day, that would address my physical health. So it's have 1 or 2 really nutritious meals. So maybe that's breakfast and lunch. Second one is move. So just move my body, whether that's going for a walk, actually going to work out, run, whatever it may be. If I don't get to the gym, it's okay because I can still meet that goal just by going for a walk around my block. And then maybe the third thing is getting sunlight or something, so going outside. And so I think that first step with your routine of just keeping it simple so that if something happens, if you have to go on a trip, a business trip, or if you have a child, make sure your routine is something that you can keep doing even in the midst of tough weeks, tough schedules, whatever it may be.
I love that you talked about the getting the steps in, because I feel like that's something that's pushed so much, right? Is the idea of you have to get 10,000 steps a day in.
Yeah.
And I understand the health benefits of that. But what really surprised me is the compounding effect of getting steps in. So essentially, if you're like me and you sit in front of a computer all day and you have an office job, you're really not going to get more than a few thousand steps in. But going from 500 steps or 1,000 or 2,000 steps a day to 4,000 has a massive health increase. And then going from 4,000 to 6,000, it compounds and it's better. And then going from 6 to 8, it's a little bit better. 8 to 10, it's a little bit better. But the biggest thing, I think most people are like, I'm never going to get 10,000 steps a day. Because that's what, like 4 or 5 miles?
Yeah.
A lot of people, unless you're on your feet all day, like you're a nurse or you're just going for very long walks or you're running or you're being very intentional about it. If you're sitting, like most people do throughout the day for work or whatever, that's not going to happen. So it's really easy to just throw the whole thing out.
Yeah.
Whereas going from wherever you're at now, if you're only getting 2,000 steps a day in, the most substantial improvement you will get is from 2 to 4. Going from 2 to 10 obviously is bigger, it's better. Yeah. But going from 2 to 4 is so much more than going from 8 to 10. Yeah. And so I feel like the idea of not getting overwhelmed with that intensity and not throwing out the whole thing. Like you were talking about, you have this routine and you were very active and you're getting these steps in, and then something changes. You have kids, it's harder, you have less time throughout the day. Still prioritizing something where, okay, I know I'm not going to get 10,000 steps a day, but I know I can. If I'm getting very little right now, maybe I can make an intentional effort to just get a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. One important thing to note too is that the importance of knowing your personality. You might see people like have either rest days or off days, and that can be a really good thing, especially for somebody who's lifting often and needs their body to rest. But for somebody like me, if I'm like really sore and I feel like I need a rest day, I can't just stay at home and lay around. I still have to go do something active, whether it's going for a walk, a long walk, or whatever it may be. Because I know as soon as I stop doing something and stop that discipline of daily moving my body, that it's going to be really hard for me to pick it up again. And so you might be similar to me, for those of you who are listening, or you might not. You might be able to take that rest day and get back into the swing of things. But it's important to know how you kind of operate, right? And how to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, there's definitely a divide, because I know my wife, she's someone who really is in tune with her body. So she knows, hey, I need to eat this to feel good. I need to eat this much carbs to get this much energy in the gym. Whereas I'm like, I don't want to eat a bunch of carbs. I feel heavy at the gym. And she's more of the science-based, no, you need the carbs. That's where you're going to get the energy. And I'm more of the push hard. It's a mental game. And so she knows on days where she's trained hard, she needs a rest. She can sit and she can feel good about herself, where I can't. If it's a rest day or I'm sore, I still need to go to the gym, or I at least need to do something. I need to do some sort of, even if it's a really just half-baked ab workout that takes 5-10 minutes, I have to physically do something, because I feel like I'm wasting away if I'm not. So
yeah,
there's a balance of knowing who you are and what you need to make yourself feel good, right? And feel healthy. So last thing I want to touch on that subject about just discipline and self-control and physical health is setting the functional goals. Becoming strong, just strong enough to lift certain weights, to run a faster mile, improve endurance for life's daily tasks, whatever it is. Setting those functional goals, I think, is a key in creating those small stepped, tangible outcomes. Something that you can strive for. Writing down little things about, I'm a big proponent for SMART goals, right? So, and I think everyone should have several goals in life, and I think one of them should fundamentally be something to do with your health. It doesn't have to be lifting weights if that's not what you're into. It could be about your nutrition, whatever it is, but writing down empirical data points that you can hit, metrics that you can hit along the way. I think that all ties into setting those functional goals. I want to talk about nutrition, strength, and longevity. So the idea of you are what you eat. So I know nutrition is something that you have a background in. I wanted to talk about how foods impact your physical performance and also just your mental clarity and longevity in life.
I'm a big believer that God has actually given us nutrition principles in the Bible, that he has kind of set the framework for us to live really healthy lives in regards to our diets. All these things, as we eat healthy and as we follow the things that God has given us that are good, affect our strength, affect our longevity, make you a better father, make you be able to play with your kids, make you a better husband, whether it's this idea in the Bible of being a protector, being ready to sacrifice and lay down your life as a husband, or it could just be for just daily chores, being strong enough to do the yard work, whatever it may be. Yeah, I think the Lord has laid out nutrition principles in the Bible to help us achieve those things and help us to experience those things. And so I'm just going to go through a quick list, and then Colton, maybe you can give your feedback on it. But the first one is balance and moderation, right? So whether it's Proverbs, like Proverbs 23, be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags, right? So this idea all throughout the Bible of moderation and not abusing stuff that is good, right? So food is good. It provides a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction. But you can definitely overdo it. You can definitely indulge too much in it. And it's the same thing with alcohol. Christ calls us not to be drunkards, right? Not to get drunk with alcohol, to have this moderation. And so with everything, especially with nutrition, there's this importance of balance and moderation. Colton, you even mentioned it can go too far on the other side, where you see somebody who's restricting their calories to 1,000 calories a day and only eating vegetables. That's really hard to do. And first of all, it's not going to set you up for success, but it's also just not a very balanced or moderate diet plan. The second thing that you see in the Bible is eating whole foods. So of course, we as Americans and now in the world are just constantly surrounded by processed foods, minimally to ultra processed foods. But in the Bible, we see God lay out the groundwork for what man should eat actually in Genesis, when he gives the fruits of the trees and the veggies, unprocessed grain, and then the beast of the field to eat for Adam and Eve and for his people. And so it's important to know that our world has changed a lot since those days, right? God's design for us to eat whole fruits and veggies and unprocessed grains and meat has definitely been skewed now.
They didn't have Triscuits.
They didn't have Triscuits
in Genesis,
although Triscuits are really good.
They're very good.
But so you see that and the importance of us now in this society making the effort, as hard as it is, to buy whole foods and to eat whole foods and to cook at home. That's a big thing, man. Like if you're able to cook at home and make your own meals where you can control what ingredients you're putting into your food, how much salt you're putting into your food, how much oil you're putting into your food, it makes a huge difference. If you're somebody who's really busy and is constantly eating out, maybe eating fast food, you don't know exactly what you're eating, right? And that's kind of scary. And so I think that's an important part too, is knowing what is in your food and controlling what you're eating. And then the last principle I kind of have on here is actually fasting. And I know you and I just had a quick conversation about this, Colton, but we see fasting as a principle in the Bible that helps us train spiritually and physically, and it connects that physical and spiritual health within our lives. And so you see something like a Daniel's fast, where Daniel was asked he decided to eat fruits and veggies for 10 days, right? And then at the end of those 10 days, he looked super strong, really healthy. He was really strong and really healthy. And you can also see scientifically that something like a Daniel's fast can be really good, where it's this brief diet, no more than 10 days or only a few days, where you kind of just do a reset on your bodily system and just give it really good, nutritious foods like fruits and veggies. And then you see biblical fasts, where you see people abstain from eating food or drinking water for a certain amount of time. And what it really hits at is this connection between temptation, right? So this temptation, our physical bodies, there comes a point where we need food, we need water, we need nutrition. And there comes this point where you're so hungry that the temptation to run to the cabinet and grab a cupcake or something is so great, and it really trains your discipline. And in return, as you train this physical discipline of dealing with temptation, it also trains you to deal with spiritual temptation. That if we're able to go a whole day without food, and when our body is telling us we need food, we need water, to say, no, actually, we're okay. We can rely on Christ. Christ is going to sustain us. Yes, our bodies might be experiencing pain, but Christ is going to sustain us. Then on the flip side, when we encounter temptation in our spiritual lives, we're able to say, hey, I got the discipline to push through this. I know that this isn't actually what I need, even though my body or my mind is telling me it. So whether it's with, for example, like lust, right? You run into a moment where you feel really tempted to lust over something, and then you're now able to tell your body, no, that's not what you need. What you need is Christ, right? And so I think fasting is a really fascinating thing that God has included in his word that directly links our physical health and our spiritual health.
Yeah, I love the concept of fasting from both sides. I know that there is some strong biblical principles related to fasting, like you touched on, but also just more and more literature is coming out about how fasting puts your body in that state of whether it's cleansing itself or it's like hitting the reset. And I think there's lots of ways to go about it. I know we were talking earlier about this. It's something that I've never done. I've intentionally eaten supper earlier in the evening and tried to delay breakfast, so I'm hitting about a 12-hour period, and I try to do that daily. But that is really the extent of my fasting, because I know a lot of people who are in a similar boat where they're struggling to even eat the amount of calories that they should be eating to correspond to the amount that they're training and trying to get enough protein in. And so I think that's a hard balance between the benefits of biblical fasting, the benefits of actually nutritionally for your body fasting, but then how to incorporate that into a diet that needs to support a higher functioning individual too, and to maintain your strength. Because like you said, there's benefits to going on certain fasts or to eat certain periods to kind of reset your body. But, you know, men aren't meant to eat lettuce for the rest of their lives too, right? Like, we need adequate amount of protein to ensure strength and muscle development. So how can we as men approach fasting without deteriorating our bodies from the nutrients that they would need to continue to build and develop muscle and maintain strength?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we can start really small. Something you could do right now that can still have the same spiritual benefits of fasting is delay a meal. Go till you're pretty hungry, right? And then I want you to take note of, when you're in this state of being really hungry, what type of food choices you make. And let's see how disciplined you really are. So that's something you could do right now without going super long without food. But it can also just expose your either lack of discipline or your poor food choices. So whether it's delaying breakfast a couple of hours and making yourself more hungry than you're used to, and then either observe yourself or have somebody else observe you. What food choices do you make? Do you still eat that nutritious meal, or do you throw in some special treat or something for you? So that's something that you can do right now that would still have the same, I think, spiritual benefits of fasting, and that would still expose how undisciplined you really are. If you wanted to actually try a fast and go multiple hours without food, you could just start off slow. So maybe you eat 3 meals a day. You eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe try a day where you don't eat breakfast at all. And when you get hungry, just go into a time of prayer, spend some time with God, and then keep doing that until you feel like it's an easy goal. And you don't have to do it consecutively. You could do it, let's say, 1 day a month. You're going to try to push yourself without food. And so those are just 2 really small steps you could take right now to start fasting. And you can also just read up more on the benefits, the physical benefits of fasting, as well as the spiritual benefits.
So I'm curious, what's the longest fast you have done?
I've done 48 hours without food. And I will say, for part of that time, I actually ended up getting sick, which actually helped me go longer because I just couldn't keep down food at that point. But yeah, I've gone about 48 hours in terms of a fast. And that was really, really hard. I know I was just talking with you about this, Colton, but I think the hardest part of fasting is actually going to bed hungry. I'm so thankful that I don't have to, that I can choose to go to bed hungry, and not like it's not just a result of the place that I'm in, that I can feed myself every single night before bed if I like to. But yeah, if you want to really experience something difficult, try going to bed hungry. That's a real challenge.
So let's talk about overcoming those weaknesses and excuses, not just for fasting, but also just health and fitness overall. I feel like the common excuses are, I don't have the time. I do that too. And I've definitely made health, or at least working out, a fairly central pillar of my life. And if I can say I don't have time, I know everyone can say I don't have time.
Yeah.
And then also, I don't know where to start. And then I'm not naturally athletic too. I think a lot of people, genetics do play a very large role in how your body responds to different workouts, but I also know it's a very common excuse as to why someone will not chase a certain style of fitness regimen. What would you think would be some, as somebody who is a father and who is in a position where your time is very valuable and you do only have certain windows of a day where you could do things, how would you overcome the I don't have time excuse?
Yeah, that's a very common excuse. And I think also too, it roots itself in this habit of thinking that, for example, going to go work out has to be this hour-long thing, or an hour and a half or 2 hours. Yeah, not a lot of people just have 2 hours lying around, especially fathers, that they can go do that. But I think the question you should be asking yourself is, what time do I have? So maybe it's you get an hour lunch break or something, and you usually take about 20 minutes to eat. You got 40 minutes right there. Or maybe it's less time than that. Maybe you get a 15-minute little break. And it's like, okay, what can I do in this 15 minutes? Instead of looking at my phone, how about I get up and go for a walk around the block? So I think it's more just switching the question from not the question of I don't have time, but actually switching it to what time do I have to actually put forth effort and discipline into my schedule.
I love that. For the next excuse, I don't know where to start. I feel like we talked about that. It's the small steps and making sure that you're prioritizing consistency over intensity. So creating those small, tangible goals that you can start right now that you know are in reach, but also push you. You're not just like, well, I go on a 5-minute walk every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just make that a goal. But increase the intensity or try to add to it in a manner that's not going to push you outside of whatever limitations you have that really can't be moved. Obviously, don't take a 2-hour lunch break if you get a 30-minute lunch break and it leads you to being fired. There's going to be a balance. The last one, I'm not naturally athletic. I mean, you can see just from people who train their bodies very heavily, like professional bodybuilders, you can really see how genetics play a role in how each person develops muscles differently. Some people have very developed chests. Some people have very developed arms, legs, whatever it is. Some people, and you can see this, some people have abs visible when they're at like 18% body fat. And some people you can't even see abs until they're like sub 10. Mm-hmm. So it really does play a big role. But I don't like the idea of that being a preventative measure from starting.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be used to an advantage. And I like the idea that you used, instead of I don't have time, where do I have time? I feel like that could be applied here. It's not where are my genetics holding me back. I'm not naturally athletic, so I can't do X. What am I good at? What is something that, my body is capable of doing this? Because I feel like anybody who'd use the excuse, well, I'm not naturally anything. I'm not genetically anything. Everything is like I'm the lowest, I'm in the 1 percentile of being able to build muscle or lose weight or whatever that looks like. Somebody who says that is only ever going to have excuses rather than actually trying to come and develop where they would be adequate, where they could find their strength, where they could find that area in their life where, I really like this and I excel at this. Or maybe I just really enjoy doing this. I really like chest day, whatever it is. If that motivates you, do it twice a week, then I don't do it 3 times a week. If it motivates you and gets you out there, finding that thing that instead of saying, I can't do this because of this, say, well, I really like, or I'm naturally good at this, and then utilizing that as a strength to build.
Mm-hmm. One important note is that our physical health journey, whether it's working out or nutrition, should be enjoyable. Because if it's not enjoyable to you, you're not going to be disciplined. And there's things about it that, of course, none of us really enjoy, and we have to still push to be disciplined. But I think especially with working out, I think everybody can find one physical activity that they really enjoy. So whether that's a sport, whether it's something that you do with somebody else, your spouse or a friend, I think everybody can eventually find that. And they might have to search. It might take some time. But it's really important to have that one piece, have that one activity that you actually find joy in and like to do. And then discipline becomes a lot easier. And then the other thing is, what's that quote where comparison is the thief of joy?
Yeah.
Right. It's such a big thing where we talked about it earlier. If we're chasing after aesthetics and these like body images, right, and idolizing over them, it's going to make it a lot harder when you start working out, you start pumping iron, and you don't have that same body and the results are not the same. And it really does steal your joy away from it. And so the shift in mindset of not necessarily going for an aesthetic, but rather just pushing yourself individually, being like, okay, if I want to chase after a good body, how about I just chase after the best my body can be, right? And so maybe the best my body can be is not having a 6-pack, Maybe it's just you're in good shape and you're strong and you might not have the biggest muscles, and that's okay. And, you don't have to look like all these bodybuilders. It's okay. God has made us all unique. I think he's made all of our physical bodies to look unique in terms of structure when they're at their best. So just take those things into mind when you're kind of encountering some of these questions and problems.
Last thing I want to touch on this is getting back on track. And maybe you can shed some light on your personal journey. How would you recommend somebody who has maybe had a good fitness regimen in the past, or has explored, or has been really in tune with their body and has kind of fallen off the wheels? Because I feel like that's also very common for people to, when they're in high school, college, whatever it is, they played sports, they were going to the gym, they were eating healthy, and then real life happens and you realize cooking your own meals isn't as easy, or there's just a lot of temptation, there's a lot less time in the day to do things. Accepting that failure, but then also refocusing your energy.
I think one of the greatest traits of being a masculine man and chasing masculinity is just humility, and realizing that you're going to fail and that God has grace, and it's okay to fail and it's okay to learn from those. And so I think with my journey of after having my daughter, my first child, I gained about 25 pounds, which is a lot. I definitely put on a lot of weight. And so after that happened, we actually had our second child about 1.5 years or 2 years later. And so within that period, I was really working at getting down my weight. And I got it down a little bit, about 5-10 pounds. When we learned that we were pregnant with our second kid, I actually made a goal for myself. My goal was to not gain any weight at all. So it wasn't necessary to lose weight. It was just not to gain weight. And I actually achieved that goal. And so now, after having our second child, I'm on this journey of like, okay, I didn't gain weight for the second kid. Now I'm going to push to just get back into rhythms, be disciplined, even though I think the weight is important for me because I've noticed just the effect extra weight has carried on my joints. I have pretty bad knee and ankle problems, back problems, whatever it may be. That's why I've made it a goal to cut down on my weight. But I think the more important goal is to just get back into rhythm, get back into being disciplined, and get back to feeling healthy. And so again, your goals are just going to completely shift as your life shifts.
I will say there is something to be said. Somebody who sits very comfortably around 210, 215, when I was pushing 240 at the peak bulk, it's really hard getting up and down stairs. And yeah, you look good in the gym when you're wearing very baggy clothes. But beyond that, you don't feel healthy. So there's definitely something to be said about just trying to chase feeling good.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like you said, I want to look good in a Speedo on the beach, right?
Exactly.
If that's what's going to motivate you, fine. But I think just feeling good about yourself, waking up, being able to spur of a moment, go on a walk, go on a hike, whatever you find joy in, and just not feeling like crap is just, it's a really good feeling. And also just joints. You and I are both tall people. You really feel it on your joints when you're moving around. And those can have some very lifelong effects, especially with knees, hips, and back. If you're someone who's heavy and then also lifts heavy too, you could do some irreparable damage. So being at a healthy weight is, or at least just where you feel physically healthy, right? It's not about being lean. It's not about being chiseled. If it's just like this is, because your body does have a natural homeostasis, right? There is a point where if you are consistently losing fat, let's say, and your body fat percentage is dropping, there's a certain point where that's where your body really wants to be. And you have to work 10 times as hard to get any lower than that. You really have to change it up. And a lot of like people who are bodybuilders really have to overcome that. People who are really trying to get down to the single digit body fat percentage, or people who are really trying to push to gain weight purely on muscle mass, right? There is a point where your body does not want to do anymore, and you really have to push past that naturally. Getting to that point, I feel like it's generalizing, but I feel like I'm safe to say most people are not at that point. Where their body, they have to fight against their body because that's where they want to be. No one's body wants to be sitting at 30-40% body fat, right? So getting to that point, you feel better about yourself. And you talked about earlier, your mental health really does improve. And that can lead the way to having improved spiritual health too. And all of a sudden your relationships, your mental clarity, there's just so many factors of your life that can be related or correlated to just general physical health.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about is integrating faith and fitness for a purposeful life. We kind of talked about this throughout. I just kind of want to highlight some of the key points that we've talked about. First is using fitness as a tool, not as an idol, and making sure that we are avoiding that vanity of the self-worship fitness culture.
Yeah.
My wife makes fun of me because if I get a pump at the gym, I'll flex in the mirror, right? She says, "Oh, you're so full of yourself." I'm like, well, that's how you check progress. But there is a degree where I think, flexing and checking progress is healthy in the sense that if that's how you're tracking progress, but it also can lead to that vanity too, right? Yeah. Where are you becoming self-indulgent? Are you self-aggrandizing yourself? Are you idolizing your image? Are you chasing the more hedonic, pleasure-seeking life, right? Yeah. Balancing that and using fitness as a tool, as a gauge, right, for your general health and well-being, not as something that you're chasing for the sake of pure personal pleasure or I think personal goals, right, are great. But if you're seeking it for putting yourself on a pedestal or purely because you want to look a certain way, that's a very slippery slope. And I know that's how I started at the gym. I feel like that's how a lot of people start at the gym is I want to look a certain way. Yeah. I want to be aesthetic. And I think there's a part of me that it's always going to be like that. I'm chasing a certain sort of aesthetic, but it has definitely grown into a tool for general health, especially as I get older and I'm starting to feel things in the morning after waking up after a heavy lift, right? There's certain things, not a life of not stretching or neglecting cardio. It's certainly put me on a path of how can I use this as a vehicle to drive general health. And so I don't know. I don't want to say never go to the gym if all you want to do is look a certain way, because again, I feel like that's how most people start. Yeah. It's just making sure that doesn't become idolatrous in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you use the analogy of using your physical health as a gauge, right? Where it's just like checking to see how well you're running and how well you're doing. Also, too, we have a problem again with the moderation of checking progress. I think most people fall into two categories. Either they obsess over their progress or they fall into the other category of not tracking their progress at all. And so it's really important to find this balance of how do I want to track my progress, my physical health journey, but then also too, how do I not let this thing get me really idolizing my results? And so that can be really hard to do. And it's really important to think through how are you going to do that. I also think, though, when you learn that balance, there's nothing more enjoyable than either setting a goal or just being disciplined in something and then seeing results, right? That's a great feeling when you're working towards something and you're seeing results. Just like somebody who's doing artwork, they're spending all this time painting a picture. And then as you start to see the picture come together, you're like, oh man, this is great. It's a great feeling. And it's something that I think we as humans were created to feel and created to kind of chase after, is to see progress and to enjoy this good gift of just physical health.
Yeah. I agree. Like using metrics as a gauge, because you can really get obsessed in the metrics. Mm-hmm. Like I know when I started tracking my macros, I was everything, very obsessive. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was on a very big deficit. So I had to be very selective. And it wasn't great. And I was really living in the numbers. And now I'm at a point where I will still track macros some days, but as I've been doing it for years, you kind of just learn what's going in your body. Yeah. And you know what your body needs. And that's just a part of the journey. And I still have a long way to go, but I'd love to get to the point where I don't need to track because it's intuitive. You know what your body needs, you know what you've had. And I'm at the point where I'm still tracking a lot of things, but I'm not tracking every day. And I know certain days it ebbs and flows. So if you're looking at it from a day-to-day basis, I feel like you're really living in the metrics and using the numbers to help guide you. Whereas if you start expanding it out on a weekly, monthly, yearly, lifelong fitness routine or fitness journey, then you can kind of see the ebbs and flows as it moves through life, and use that as just a general gauge of how you're doing physically, and just watching the trends. And that's a really nice place to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I don't think anyone's ever going to be there, but to continually strive for that. And each step you get closer to that, and you're not living in the numbers, but you're really able to just live life and enjoy it. Not in, again, the self-seeking hedonic pleasure way, but in the, like, I am here by God's grace. He's given me this body. I'm healthy. I feel good. I can do things with my body. I can provide for my family. I can protect them. I can support them. I can be a man, right? It's a good place to be without being bogged down in, oh, I only got a 40-minute workout in today instead of my typical hour and a half, or I am short 10 grams of protein, or I like, you can get over these minute details. And I think that's a really slippery slope to having your health become an idol, or maybe at least just having a hold on your life. Whereas instead you should be in the driver's seat pushing this thing.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Colton. As somebody who is, I would say, pretty disciplined with their physical health, and would you say you have a healthy level of gauging and tracking your physical health as well?
Compared to what it used to be, yes.
Okay.
But probably not. And I think I'm only ever going to answer that question as no, because you can always be better. I'm constantly moving the goalpost. Yeah. So comparatively, yes. I used to have some pretty unhealthy health practices.
Yeah.
I used to have some pretty bad body dysmorphia, self-image problems back in high school, and that led to some pretty unhealthy practices. I've been very large. I've been very skinny. I'm probably somewhere in between now, but yeah. I'm trying to just I'm chasing a more muscular state, but I've certainly done some pretty unhealthy things and been in some pretty dark places with my health. And now I feel like I enjoy what I do. But if I were to skip a day at the gym, I also feel like it was a bad day. So there's definitely room for improvement. I am a strong believer that addiction isn't inherently evil and can be used as a tool for growth very carefully.
Okay.
And I think I have used that to my benefit to improve my health, becoming addicted to improving my body's physical state to the degree that it hasn't overcome my life. But that's a constant balance of trying to make sure that I'm using it as a tool for growth, not as something that's putting me in a cage. And that's something I'm still battling, because like I said, if I miss a day at the gym, I certainly feel like I could have done more, or I feel like that day wasn't wasted, but I feel like I'm not making progress. Like I'm reverting. So there's certainly room for growth. To answer your question in a long-winded way, no, but I'm better than I was yesterday, and I hope to be better tomorrow.
Okay. So a follow-up question off of that. How does your measurement for how you're improving physically compare to your measurement for how you're improving spiritually? How do those two stack up against each other?
I feel like that goes back to using a multifaceted approach to general improvement. So I used to put a lot of my eggs in the physical health basket. That's where I was doing all my improvement. And as I think I matured and developed, I realized that's one, I don't have to take away from that to put somewhere else, but I certainly should not be focusing solely on physical health.
Yeah.
So I think I definitely cultivated a routine of discipline and strong willpower throughout the years. And then I was able to take that in what was a very unhealthy manner and shift that into, okay, how can I develop things in my life that really matter? Because if all you ever have is big biceps, then you're still missing out on a lot of what life has to offer. You're not a balanced man. You're not chasing masculinity in its proper way, right? So that has then allowed me to use those tools, use the concepts, and apply it into, okay, how can I increase my knowledge? How can I learn more, become more knowledgeable? Okay, how can I seek wisdom? How can I know more? How can I apply this to actually leading my family? When I first got married, I really struggled with, how on earth do I lead this house, this household, right? And we don't have kids yet, so it's only going to expound that pressure. And it's something I really struggle with, because I was very fearful of, I can't be domineering. I can't be like, it's sexist to be the head of the house. I can't, like, I was very scared of that. And so as I transitioned out of focusing solely on physical health and focusing more on all areas of my health, including my spiritual health and my relationship with God, which I would say was very one-dimensional before. It was very much, here are the laws that God has commanded me I to live within them. That's my box, right? Yeah. Now it's much more relational, as it was intended, to have a relationship with Christ. I have been able to learn what it means to be the head of the house and to lead the family in a healthy way. I have learned what it means to have a relationship with God. I didn't know what that meant before. I didn't know you could have that. I've gained wisdom. I've gained wisdom from proper sources. I've gotten involved, and I've started seeking more areas that are going to grow me in a more whole-rounded approach.
Yeah, I think as we talk about, that's really good. I think as we dive into integrating faith and fitness for a purposeful life, I really do think biblical masculinity is recognizing that we need both physical and spiritual disciplines, and that there's this daily sacrifice, and that they both train each other. And so I think getting back to measuring progress, right? I think a lot of us it's a lot easier to measure progress with one or the other. So for most people, I would say it's easier to measure progress with our physical health. And we have a habit of sometimes not measuring our progress spiritually. And I think there's this balance. Of course, you can get into idolatrous progress spiritually, but having a healthy way to measure both our spiritual life and our physical life really gives us a lot of purpose as men. And I think really then starts to show us how we need to keep working and how we need to keep improving towards that biblical masculinity.
I think you and I have a very, very similar mindset on how, when we're integrating faith and fitness into a purposeful life, we can use spiritual growth, or spiritual growth can be achieved through physical discipline.
Yeah.
Right. And how integrated those two are.
Yeah. But I think even too, just like we talked about, the joy that comes with tracking your nutrition, the joy that comes with seeing gains in the mirror, Colton flexing over here in the gym. I think we should also have the same strive for joy in our spiritual lives. Hey, this last week, I sat down and read the Bible 2 more days this week. Like, we should be having joy in that. This last week, I did really good with temptation, right? We should be rejoicing in that. And so I think when we learn to do that in both our spiritual and physical lives, it really just brings a lot of goodness to our daily life, and to us as men too. I think men really love to see progress, and also too, I think, want to feel like they're doing a good job. And I think tracking those two things can really attribute to that.
I love that idea of how we can apply that same gratitude for whatever milestone or success we've reached with our physical health to our spiritual health as well. Mm-hmm. And I feel like as men, the stoicism, the stoic mindset, going monk mode, right? Just you hunker down and you do it yourself. You do it solo. That's something that I've always found very appealing. I feel like a lot of men do, being able to just like do something yourself, being self-achieving, right? But there's a lot of downfalls to that. And you can do that physically, right? You can go work out alone, and you can achieve empirical success physically by hunkering down, but that certainly doesn't feel as good as having other men be there for you to support you and to push you in your pitfalls, but then also help you celebrate your victories. And that really comes through in spiritual health, because you're not going to flex, your knowledge of the Bible in the mirror alone.
Yeah.
But if you have a group of of men that are able to support you and are able to say, hey, like, you've really been putting in the work.
Yep.
Or you have a conversation and someone says, wow, like they're really supportive of your spiritual journey. That's why I feel like having a group of men, which it's something that I'm trying to work on, and I'm not very good at it, is being supportive of the other men in your life, having the network to help lift each other up, to support each other verbally, physically, right? Just the verbal support other men publicly.
Yeah.
Being able to do that, I think, is a great tool to keep all of us on track and to keep on this journey of growth and progress and improvement. And that really comes through spiritually, because I don't see a lot of other ways of getting that healthy gratification for pushing yourself and growing spiritually without being in community. I mean, that's what church is, right? Is we were meant to be together, to worship together, to support each other in a like-minded small community.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like, is a really good tool for tracking progress and to encourage growth.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too that as we talk about tracking these actual attainable goals spiritually, the ultimate progress that we're tracking is how much do you love Christ and how much do you love other people, right? And so that's the ultimate goal. Those are the two greatest commandments that Christ has given us. And so when we talk about tracking goals like opening our Bible or praying or whatever it may be, whatever other spiritual discipline, that's not the ultimate data that we're tracking, I guess is what I'm saying. But those spiritual disciplines all help us improve in loving Christ and in loving other people.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because empirically, the ways to empirically track spiritual growth are not the end result. They translate to what the end result should be, because otherwise it can become very self-aggrandizing. It can become either I have to open up my Bible today and read this many verses as a part of my personal goals, which, if that's the tool that you use, that's what I use personally to make sure that it happens. It's a part of my discipline routine, but that shouldn't be the checked box. That shouldn't be the thing to celebrate, because that in itself can become idolatrous. Is you are now focusing on doing the thing rather than what the thing is supposed to do, what the outcome is supposed to do. And that's like what you said. It's how, well, essentially, how can you show your love for others? And that's, men, we're called to love our wives as Christ loved the church, as Christ loved and put out and served others. Those more empirically tracked things related to spiritual health should only ever be things that help us achieve that, right? To achieve how can we love and support others and put outwardly.
And there is a piece too where spiritually and biblically we're told that our spiritual life should be bearing some sort of fruit, right? And so as we dive into spiritual disciplines, we should be learning to love Christ more, and we should be learning to love other people more. And so I guess one note is, if you are diving into these spiritual disciplines and you find that they're not directly affecting those things, then maybe it's appropriate to take a step back and maybe not even track for a season, or just consult and rediscover, why do we have these spiritual disciplines? But I think integrating faith and fitness for a purposeful life, as we're talking about that we as men and within our masculinity are just called to love Christ and to love others. And the biggest way that we can do that is through spiritual disciplines, like we talked about, opening your Bible, praying, but then it's also through our physical bodies, and how we care for our family, how we care for our wives. And both of these things put together really help us kind of match that purpose that Christ has created us for.
This is why I love having you on, is you have such a deep knowledge of Scripture that I'm not able to apply to life. Let's talk about how to apply everything we've talked about, or how to live this out in our day-to-day lives. I guess the first would be creating that daily routine that supports health and masculinity. So morning and evening habits for long-term success. That would be creating those small steps. That would be finding the time or knowing when you have the time to do things related to your physical health and being intentional about them. If it's the morning workout, if it's getting the steps in, if it's being intentional about your whole healthy meals of the day, as you were talking about. And that relates to more than just going to the gym and eating protein. Maybe if after 5 o'clock all you do is sit on the couch, there's evening habits where you could get up and encourage more physical movement, whatever that would be, to play with your kids, to go on a walk with your family or your wife, or even just being present with people in your community, using your physical health as a vessel to make sure that you're living out what physical health is supposed to be leading to. Same with that spiritual health. It shouldn't be being in shape isn't the end all be all. Being in shape is our duty as men because of what it leads to. The next, I feel, is holding yourself accountable and making sure that you are healthily tracking the metrics or having some sort of gauge, whatever works best for you, to make sure that you are continually making steps in the right direction. Because we could certainly be making what we feel is improvement and realizing it's going down the wrong path. If you've ever gone down a YouTube rabbit hole of biblical theories, it's really easy where you think you're learning and you're making progress, but really you are walking in the opposite direction. And I think that really leans into what we were talking about last, is the importance of brotherhood and having a group of men that are able to push you daily and make sure that you're on the right track and make sure that the metrics aren't the things being chased, but the metrics are used as a tool, as a vessel to properly orientate yourself towards what physical health is supposed to lead to.
Accountability is so important. We as humans were created not to do everything on our own. That is very clear, right? So with physical fitness, obviously we need accountability to somebody, whether it's a brother or a sister in Christ, or just a good friend or a coach, to just help us track progress, but then also to get on us every once in a while when we're falling away from our discipline. And it's the same thing spiritually too. We see that with the church and see that with temptation and spiritual disciplines, that we need people to help us in our time of need when we're weak. And Christ and God really created us to rely on one another and to rely on him. And so that's an important thing with your physical fitness and spiritual fitness, is to know that Christ made you to rely on others and to rely on him.
So for some final words of encouragement, what are something that all of you can do this week to take that step to improve your physical health and making sure that you are properly orientated, living out biblical principles, chasing masculinity? I want to reiterate and encourage a lifelong pursuit of discipline, strength, and wisdom, and how integral those are all tied to one another. Matthew, I want to thank you for joining me today. Do you have any final words of encouragement?
Final words of encouragement. Oh man. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Such a common saying, but so true, that this journey of physical fitness and spiritual health and masculinity is definitely a marathon, that we're called to just one step at a time, take the next step. And so I encourage you guys, everybody who's listening, to just take a step in your journey, and one step at a time, focus.
Well said. This was a lot of fun. I hope we can do this again soon. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about yourself and to kind of walk through some of these principles today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Colton.
Thank you, everyone who is listening. Thank you for tuning in to Chasing Masculinity. Until next time, keep chasing.